So when Jay told me we were talking about blind spots in economics, which are areas vital to economic life, which have tended to be overlooked, my first thought of what has tended to be neglected is the concept of time. Now, I'm not going to enter into big paeans of philosophy about what is time. My function here is a lot simpler. What do I mean by time? I mean a little more than just adding t subscripts to your variables. I actually mean integrating some of its essential features, which I mean by sequences. So time is sequential. A follows B follows C. But they're not completely disconnected. The past has implications on the present, and the future has implications on the present as well. And time is irreversible. It only goes in one direction. You can't really go backwards. So it's a very simple and rather straightforward concept. And you assume that economists should have been able to handle it kind of rather simply. To emphasize, though, it also has been a source of an enormous amount of controversies. From the very starts in the 1820s, when Ricardo and Malthus were arguing about the general gluts controversies, it all boiled down to whether it was permanent or temporary. It was all about the different time frames they were using and having a quarrel about it without settling on what time dimensions they were talking. Time is of course critical to a lot of areas. It's not simply one area of economics that covers it, but a lot of areas have time as a critical aspect, and it is essential to our understanding. Here's just a list of a few of them. Of course, time is absolutely essential for growth theory. That's, after all, the growth of an economy over time. It's also for development, how economic structures change over time. It's critical for capital theory, where time itself is a factor of production. And in certain schools of thought, like the Austrian, time is actually the measure, the uniform measure of capital. It's essential for theories of money. I mean, money and financial instruments, after all, are stores of value about shifting purchasing power over time. It's critical in macroeconomics. Firm investment, which is sort of the pivot of macroeconomics, is contingent on present decisions about a radically uncertain future. It's critical in the conceptions of competition. Competition, after all, is a dynamic process of firms entering in and out of industries and sectors and bringing about a uniform rate of profit. It's also critical to the concept of equilibrium. At least in the way it was originally conceived, equilibrium is supposed to be a gravitational point to which other prices are converging to or tending to over time. And time is actually a very important factor of value itself, depending on your time horizon and what is scarce and what is not scarce in that area. The theory of value used may change or defer. So economists have considered, when they're constructing these concepts, always take time into consideration. And it's also, you'd think they'd have resolved it all, or they had resolved it simply, but it's, again, proven to be an enormous source of difficulties. I'm not the first to say that. Marshall himself puts it down as the one factor that's behind a source of a lot of controversies over the history of economics. So to give you an example I'm just going to use two simple examples of some difficulties that have arisen. These diagrams should be familiar to you. The one on the left, I'm sure you know very well. It's an equilibrium. Very simple, very straightforward. The one on the right is a disequilibrium. And this is a little trickier to define. Equilibrium is one thing. We know that. You know how to solve that. Disequilibrium, well, what does that mean? That means wrong prices, wrong quantities, wrong plans, wrong expectations. There are many ways that you can define a disequilibrium. So it's a much harder concept. Now, in Econ 101, when you're confronted with a disequilibrium situation, you just assume, okay, so the price mechanism works, and the price goes down, and everything goes back to equilibrium. But how exactly is that supposed to happen? Who is actually doing the adjustment? How does the adjustment happen? How long does it take? These are time-dependent concepts which economists have struggled with. Now, a lot of illustrious economists, starting from Walras himself, have been trying to define the adjustment process to an equilibrium. But they have obviously entered immediately into difficulties. once you allow out of equilibrium exchange, once you allow things to happen out of equilibrium, then all of a sudden the equilibrium starts changing and you start having elements of path dependency when the equilibrium you're chasing is moving. In which case, are you going to an equilibrium? Maybe the equilibrium concept is not the right one to use. Maybe you should, like Veblen recommended, adopt an evolutionary outlook. Rather than tending to go somewhere, just look for patterns of how the economy changes. So that's a simple example. And to just emphasize, this has never been resolved. The stability question in general equilibrium sort of reached a dead end in the 60s when they realized they couldn't actually resolve this. So this is just one example of the difficulties that time brings in when you take time seriously. I'll give you one more simple one. This is maybe familiar to you as well from the Marshallian periods. To give an example of this, as Ricardo and Marshall and a lot of old economists used to think about, different value depending on the time structure you're thinking about. In the market period, you got prices determined by demand. In the short period, where you have supply is a good flexible, but factors fixed, you have prices determined by demand and supply. But in the long period, when factors are fully flexible, prices, the elasticity of supply now becomes infinite, in which case demand stops being a determinant of price. Now the theory is different. Price is determined by something else, maybe cost of production, maybe some other theory. So just taking these time problems, all of a sudden your theory of value, which you think is uniform and universal, changes with the time structure you're working with. So these are just some of the difficulties and controversies that have pitted economists over the years to try to resolve the difficulties that they encounter when they try to deal with time and in economic concept with economic concepts. So what has been the resolution? I'm putting up these two quotes simply because they're on the verge of something that was about to happen in the 70s and 80s. When economists were confronting these problems of stability, when they're confronting these problems of capital, when they're confronting these problems that are brought about by time, they decided basically to abolish it. Okay? If you can't deal with time, eliminate it. And that is essentially what happened. So you can't deal with disequilibrium, you can't deal with dynamic processes of equilibrium exchange, get rid of it. Assume you're always in equilibrium. Poof, time problem solved. You can't deal with long-run theories of value. Well, let's compactify all history with all preferences and endowments folded into one period. Poof, time problem solved. Can't deal with fundamental uncertainty. So let us assume a full set of states with calculable probability, rational expectations. Poof, time problem solved. Can't deal with money, can't deal with finance, assume all future markets, put them all into time equals zero, open the spot markets, and then just have the rest of time unfolding and fulfilling contracts that are decided in one period. So the trick has always been to sort of get rid of time somehow in order to find your solutions. Now, all these assumptions obviously are unrealistic, but economists are not necessarily being foolish. They're not unaware of the facts of life. They're not unaware that time exists. They impose these assumptions because they want to abolish time. And they want to abolish time not for any deep reason or good reason or something they've figured out, but simply because they want an easy existence. What is lost with the abolition? Well, a lot of these concepts that we spoke at the beginning, issues like capital, competition, money, equilibrium, they lose a lot of their meaning without the time element. So this prevents us from understanding these ideas, and it prevents us from using them properly. To analyze market microstructure, adjustment processes, to understand money and finance, investment and capital, our understanding of these concepts has hobbled as long as when we eliminate time from the element of time from their consideration. So I urge you, as you go forward, to not fall into the same temptation. Take time seriously. Make the effort to understand the time element and the processes that are behind the concepts you're using. Thank you.